The gun felt cold against Ava Chen's temple as she stood in the middle of Rosario's restaurant, her hands trembling but her voice steady. "I'm not leaving without him," she said, staring down the barrel of a weapon held by one of New York's most dangerous men. 6-year-old Marco clung to her legs, his small fists gripping her uniform so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Behind her, Dante Moretti, the man they called the Wolf of Manhattan, watched with those dark, calculating eyes that had sentenced countless men to their deaths. But Ava wasn't thinking about that. She was thinking about the little boy who had been sobbing in the corner booth for 30 minutes while his father conducted business. The same little boy who had whispered to her, "You're the first person who's been nice to me all week." The enforcer holding the gun looked to Dante for orders, and the entire restaurant held its breath. Then something extraordinary happened. Dante Moretti, the man who never showed weakness, who ruled the underworld with an iron fist, nodded slowly. "Lower your weapon," he said quietly. "She stays." That moment, that single choice made by a broken waitress who had been called worthless her entire life, would transform not just her destiny, but the fate of one of New York's most powerful crime families. But to understand how Ava Chen became the woman brave enough to stand up to a mafia boss for a child she barely knew, we have to go back. Back to where her story really began. 4 years earlier, Ava stood outside her parents' pristine home in suburban Connecticut, her graduation cap clutched in trembling hands. She called them 17 times that morning. 17 calls that went straight to voicemail. The ceremony was in 2 hours, and she already knew the truth settling like lead in her stomach. They weren't coming. "Ava." Her roommate Jessica appeared at her shoulder, concern etched across her face. "Are you okay?" "They're not answering," Ava whispered, staring at her phone as if willing it to ring. "My graduation is today, and they're not even answering." Jessica squeezed her hand. Maybe they're on their way and can't pick up, but Ava knew better. She'd known since she was 12 years old that her parents saw her as their greatest disappointment. The daughter who wasn't pretty enough, smart enough, successful enough. The daughter who had chosen worthless education over the business career they demanded. The daughter who had dared to dream of teaching children instead of making money. Her phone finally rang at 11:47 a.m., 13 minutes before the ceremony began. "Hello, Mom." Ava's voice cracked with hope. "Ava, we're not coming." Her mother's voice was cold, businesslike, as though she were canceling a dentist appointment. "Your father and I decided our time would be better spent at the Harrison merger meeting." Ava felt her world tilt. "But it's my graduation. I'm the first person in our family to get a master's degree. I am masters in education." Her father's voice cut in from the background, sharp with disdain. "Congratulations on spending 6 years of our money to become a glorified babysitter. We're done supporting this fantasy." "Ava," her mother continued, "you've disappointed us for the last time. Don't call us again unless you're ready to apologize for wasting your life." The line went dead. Ava stood there, phone pressed to her ear, as her world shattered into a million pieces. Around her, families laughed and took photos, parents beaming with pride at their graduating children. She had never felt more alone. "Ava." Jessica's voice seemed to come from very far away. "They said I'm a disappointment." Ava heard herself say, "They said I wasted my life." She walked through that graduation ceremony in a daze, accepting her diploma with tears streaming down her face that everyone assumed were tears of joy. Only Jessica knew the truth. Only Jessica saw how Ava's hand shook as she folded her cap and gown later, how her eyes had gone hollow with a pain that transcended ordinary hurt. That night, alone in her apartment, Ava stared at her master's degree, summa cum laude, specialized in early childhood development, and felt worthless. If her own parents couldn't see her value, what did that say about her? The months that followed became a blur of rejection. Despite her exceptional credentials, teaching positions were scarce. Schools wanted experienced educators, not fresh graduates, no matter how passionate or qualified. Her savings dwindled. Her student loans came due, and her parents' words echoed in her mind every single day. Disappointment, failure, worthless. By month 4, Ava was surviving on ramen and hope. By month 6, the hope had died too. That's when she saw the Help Wanted sign in Rosario's restaurant window. The restaurant sat in the heart of Little Italy, a family establishment that had operated for 43 years. The owner, Mrs. Sofia Rosario, was a tiny Italian woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. "You have experience waitressing?" Sophia asked, looking Ava up and down skeptically. "No, ma'am," Ava admitted, desperate honesty in her voice. "But I'm a hard worker. I'm reliable, and I need this job more than I can express." Sophia studied her for a long moment. "You're educated. I can hear it in how you speak. What's someone like you doing applying here?" Ava's throat tightened. "Someone like me is broke, alone, and trying to survive while proving to herself that she's worth something." Something in Ava's raw vulnerability must have resonated because Sophia's expression softened. "You start tomorrow. 6 a.m., don't be late, and don't make me regret this." Ava's first month waitressing was brutal. Her feet ached from 12-hour shifts. Her hands developed calluses from carrying heavy trays. Drunk customers grabbed at her, made crude comments, treated her like she was invisible or worse, like she was nothing. Every night, Ava collapsed in a bed and wondered if her parents were right, if she had wasted her life, if this was all she would ever be. But then something unexpected happened. It started with small moments. A little girl who came in with her grandmother and drew Ava a picture. "You have a kind smile," the child said shyly, and Ava felt something crack open in her chest. A teenager who lingered after her meal to tell Ava she wanted to be a teacher too. "You seem like you understand people," the girl said. "That's the kind of teacher I'd want to learn from." Ava began to notice the families that came through the restaurant's doors. The tired parents juggling toddlers. The children who acted out because they were hungry or overwhelmed. The quiet kids who sat in corners, invisible to everyone else. She started keeping a basket of crayons and coloring books behind the counter. Started kneeling down to speak to children at eye level, the way her professors had taught her. Started noticing when families were struggling and quietly asking Sophia to comp their appetizers or desserts. "You have a gift," Sophia told her one evening, watching Ava defuse a toddler's meltdown with a few gentle words and a puppet made from a napkin. "You see people. Really see them. That's rare." Ava felt something stir in her chest, something that had been dormant since graduation day. Purpose. Maybe she wasn't teaching in a classroom, but she was still touching lives, still making a difference in small, precious ways. But what Ava didn't know was that her gift for seeing people, especially hurt, lonely children, was about to collide with the most dangerous man in New York City. Dante Moretti walked into Rosario's on a gray Tuesday afternoon, and the entire restaurant transformed. Conversations quieted. Eyes averted. Sophia went pale and immediately hurried to the kitchen. He was imposing, over 6 feet tall, with dark hair silvered at the temples and eyes like black ice. He wore a suit that probably cost more than Ava's yearly rent, and moved with the dangerous grace of a predator. But it wasn't Dante who caught Ava's attention. It was the little boy trailing behind him. Marco Moretti was 6 years old, small for his age, with his father's dark eyes, but none of his confidence. He walked with his shoulders hunched, his gaze fixed on the floor, and when Dante directed him to sit in a corner booth, the child obeyed instantly, silently, the way children do when they've learned that making noise brings consequences. Dante sat across from him, immediately pulling out his phone and launching into a rapid-fire conversation in Italian. Marco sat perfectly still, hands folded in his lap, not daring to move or speak. Ava watched this for approximately 30 seconds before her teacher's instincts overrode her common sense. She approached the table with water glasses and a gentle smile. "Good afternoon. Welcome to Rosario's. Dante's eyes flicked up to her, assessing and dismissing her in less than a second. Coffee. Black. And keep it coming. Of course. And for the young gentleman. Dante looked at Marco as though he'd forgotten the child existed. He'll have water. Marco's stomach growled audibly, but he remained silent, his small face expressionless. Ava's heart clenched. She'd seen this before. Children who'd learned to make themselves invisible, to not ask for things because asking always led to disappointment or worse. Our children's menu has some wonderful options, Ava said gently, crouching down to Marco's eye level. What's your favorite food in the whole world? Marco's eyes widened slightly, darting to his father for permission to speak. When Dante just waved dismissively and returned his phone call, Marco whispered, "Spaghetti with meatballs." "An excellent choice," Ava said warmly. "You have very good taste. I'll make sure Chef makes them extra special for you." She saw the tiniest flicker of surprise in Marco's eyes, as though kindness was a foreign language he was struggling to translate. Over the next hour, Ava watched as Dante conducted business meeting after business meeting, entirely absorbed in conversations about shipments and territories and problems that needed handling. Marco sat through all of it, silent and still as a statue, barely touching the food Ava had brought him, until the tears started. They came slowly at first, silent tears sliding down Marco's cheeks as he stared at his untouched spaghetti. Then his small shoulders began to shake. He was crying without making a sound, years of practice evident in how quietly he could fall apart. Dante didn't notice. He was deep in conversation with a man who'd arrived and slid into the booth beside Marco, pushing the child against the wall. But Ava noticed. She moved quickly, carrying a small bowl of gelato to the table. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cutting through the men's conversation. "I need to borrow Marco for just one moment." Dante looked up, irritation flashing across his face. "We're in the middle of, it will only take a moment," Ava said firmly, already extending her hand to Marco. "There's something very important in the kitchen I need his help with." Something in her tone, or perhaps the fact that no one had dared interrupt Dante Moretti in years, made him pause. He stared at Ava, and she stared back, refusing to be intimidated. After a long moment, he gave a single sharp nod. Marco took Ava's hand and followed her to the kitchen, his small hand trembling in hers. In the kitchen's quiet corner, away from prying eyes, Ava knelt down. "Marco, honey, are you okay?" The dam broke. Marco dissolved into sobs, the kind of deep body-shaking cries that came from weeks or months of holding everything inside. "I want my mama," he choked out between sobs. "Nobody told me where she went. Papa won't talk about her. He's always angry now. I try to be good. I try so hard to be quiet and not bother him, but he still won't look at me. It's like he wishes I disappeared too." Ava felt her heart shatter. She pulled Marco into a hug, letting him cry into her shoulder, stroking his hair the way her mother had never done for her. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. None of this is your fault. None of it." "Everyone left," Marco whispered. "First Mama, then Nana, then all my nannies. They all leave. Papa says I'm too much trouble." "You're not too much trouble," Ava said fiercely, pulling back to look him in the eyes. "You are a wonderful, sweet, brave little boy who deserves to be loved and protected. And anyone who makes you feel otherwise is wrong. Do you hear me? Wrong." Marco stared at her with those heartbroken dark eyes, and Ava saw herself reflected there. The child who'd been told she wasn't enough, who'd internalized that message until it became her identity. "I'm going to tell you something very important," Ava continued, cupping his tear-stained face gently. "The way other people treat you doesn't define your worth. Your papa is going through something difficult, and sometimes when adults hurt, they forget how to show love. But that's about his pain, not about your value. You are precious. You are important. And you deserve people in your life who see that." "Really?" Marco's voice was so small, so hopeful, It made Ava's throat tight. Really? And I'm going to prove it to you. She stood, taking his hand. Come on, let's go back out there, and you're going to see something important. When they returned to the dining room, Dante was deep in heated conversation with three men who joined him. Marco started to shrink back, trying to disappear again, but Ava squeezed his hand. She walked directly to the booth, interrupting without hesitation. Mr. Moretti, I need to speak with you. Now, Dante's eyes went cold and dangerous. I'm in the middle of a business discussion, and Marco is in the middle of a childhood, Ava said, her voice steady despite the fear hammering in her chest. He's 6 years old, and he's been sitting here for over an hour watching you conduct business while crying silently because he thinks you don't care about him. The entire restaurant went silent. The men at the table looked at Ava like she'd just signed her death warrant. Dante stood slowly, towering over her. You have no idea what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about, Ava said, refusing to back down. I'm talking about a little boy who thinks he's worthless because the most important person in his life treats him like an inconvenience. I'm talking about a child who's lost his mother and is now losing his father too. Not to death, but to indifference. You dare. Dante's voice was lethal. Yes, I dare, Ava interrupted, her voice rising. Because someone has to. Someone has to stand up for that little boy and tell you that whatever business empire you're building, whatever power you're consolidating, none of it will matter if you lose your son in the process. He needs his father, not the Mafia boss, not the businessman, his father. And if you can't see that, if you can't put him first even for one afternoon, then you don't deserve him. The words hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. Ava's heart pounded so hard she thought it might explode, but she held Dante's gaze, refusing to look away. What happened next shocked everyone. Dante's expression cracked. Just for a second, Ava saw past the cold exterior to the grief and exhaustion underneath. He looked at Marco, really looked at him, and seemed to see for the first time the tears on his son's face, the way the child was trembling. Get out, Dante said quietly to the men at his table. All of you. Now. They scattered without a word. When they were gone, Dante crouched down in front of Marco. His movements were stiff, awkward, a man who'd forgotten how to be gentle. Marco, he said, his voice rough. I am sorry. I haven't been a good papa lately. Marco threw his arms around Dante's neck, sobbing again, but this time with relief. Dante held his son, and Ava saw his hand shake as he clutched the small body close. When Dante looked up at Ava over Marco's shoulder, something had shifted in his eyes. Thank you, he said quietly. No one dares to. He couldn't finish. Someone had to, Ava said softly. He's worth fighting for. That was the moment everything changed. Over the following weeks, Dante brought Marco to the restaurant every Tuesday and Thursday. But now, instead of conducting business, he sat with his son, teaching him to play cards, asking about his day, actually listening. And Marco transformed before Ava's eyes, the silent, terrified child slowly becoming more animated, more trusting, more alive. Ava always stopped by their table, bringing Marco crayons and coloring books, chatting with him about his favorite cartoons and his fish at home. She taught him simple Italian phrases that made Sophia laugh. She showed him how to make paper airplanes from napkins. And she couldn't help but notice how Dante watched her with those dark, intense eyes, as though he was trying to solve a puzzle he couldn't quite figure out. One evening, after Marco had fallen asleep in the booth, Dante caught Ava's arm as she passed. Sit with me, please. Ava slid into the booth across from him, suddenly nervous. This close, she could see the faint scars on his knuckles, the exhaustion lines around his eyes. You're different from anyone I've ever met, Dante said without preamble. Most people are terrified of me. You stood up to me for a child you barely knew. He needed someone in his corner, Ava said simply. Every child does. Who was in your corner? The question was asked quietly, but Ava felt it like a physical touch. When you were young, who stood up for you? Ava's throat tightened. No one. That's how I know how important it is. Dante studied her for a long moment. Tell me about you. Not the waitress, the real you. So Ava told him about her master's degree, her parents' rejection, the graduation they'd skipped, the dreams that had slowly died. She told him about feeling worthless, about wondering if they were right, if she'd wasted her life. When she finished, Dante's jaw was tight with anger. They're fools. Anyone who looks at you and sees failure is blind. That's kind of you to say, but I don't say things to be kind, Dante interrupted. I say them because they're true. Ava, in 3 weeks, you've done more for my son than a dozen trained professionals. You see people, their pain, their needs, their worth. That's not a common gift. That's extraordinary. Ava felt tears prick her eyes. I'm just a waitress. You're a woman who stood up to one of the most dangerous men in New York to protect a child. You're a woman who turned her pain into empathy instead of bitterness. You're a woman who's worth 100 of the people your parents probably admire. He leaned forward. Don't let anyone, especially them, tell you you're not enough. Something shifted in Ava's chest, like a door opening after years of being locked. The weeks turned into months, and Ava became a fixture in Marco's life and Dante's. She started coming to their house on weekends, helping Marco with his homework, reading him stories, teaching him the patience and encouragement he'd been starving for. And slowly, carefully, Ava and Dante began to see each other, really see each other, past the waitress and the mobster to the broken people underneath, both trying to heal from devastating losses. Dante told her about his wife, Elena, who died suddenly from an aneurysm, leaving him drowning in grief he didn't know how to process. I became cruel, he admitted one night. I threw myself into work because feeling nothing was easier than feeling everything. I didn't realize I was losing Marco in the process. Ava told him about the phone call on graduation day, how her parents' words had carved themselves into her soul. I believed them, she whispered. I thought maybe I really was worthless. You're priceless, Dante said fiercely, taking her hand. And one day, I'm going to prove it to you. 6 months after that first explosive encounter, everything came to a head. Ava was closing the restaurant late one night when 3 men burst through the door. She recognized them, rivals from the Castellano family who'd been trying to push Dante out of territory disputes. Where's Moretti? The leader demanded, grabbing Ava's arm roughly. I don't know what you're talking about, Ava said, trying to keep her voice steady. Don't lie to us. You're his woman. Everyone knows it. You're going to call him, and you're going to tell him if he wants to see you alive, he'll meet us at the warehouse on 5th. They dragged Ava to their car, and fear unlike anything she'd ever known flooded her system. This was real. This was deadly. This was the world Dante had warned her about. But when they threw her into the warehouse, when the leader pressed a gun to her temple and called Dante, Ava made a choice. She thought about Marco, sweet, brave Marco who'd learned to trust again. She thought about Dante, who'd taught her she was worthy of love. She thought about every child who'd smiled at her in the restaurant, every small moment of connection that had reminded her why her life mattered. And she decided that even if this was how her story ended, she would not go quietly. When Dante arrived, alone, as they demanded, and they ordered him to sign over his territories, Ava acted. She stomped hard on her captor's foot, twisted away from the gun, and threw herself between Dante and the weapons pointed at him. No, she said firmly. You'll have to go through me. The men laughed. Dante looked terrified. Ava, I'm done being invisible, Ava said, her voice ringing with newfound strength. I'm done letting people treat me and the people I love like we don't matter. You want to hurt him? You go through me first. What followed was chaos. Dante's men bursting in, having followed him despite orders. A brief, brutal fight, and then silence, punctuated only by Ava's ragged breathing as Dante pulled her into his arms. You could have died, he said against her hair, his voice shaking. You stupid, brave, beautiful woman. You could have died. But I didn't, Ava whispered back. I chose to fight. For you, for Marco, for us. I chose to be worth saving. 2 weeks later, Dante Moretti did something unprecedented. He arranged for Ava to meet with the dean of Columbia University's education department, called in favors, and used his considerable influence to create a position that didn't exist before, Director of Family Outreach and Child Development for At-Risk Youth. It's not charity, he told Ava when she tried to refuse. It's justice. You have a gift, and children need it. My money is going to do something good for once. The day Ava accepted her first paycheck from Columbia, the day she walked into her own office with her name on the door, she called her parents for the first time in over a year. Ava. Her mother's voice was cold. Have you finally come to your senses? Actually, yes, Ava said calmly. I've come to realize that you were wrong. About everything. I'm not a failure. I'm not worthless. I'm a woman who's using my education to change children's lives, who's found love in unexpected places, and who's finally learned that I define my own worth. Not you. How dare you? I'm not finished, Ava interrupted. I'm calling to tell you that I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. I forgive you for missing my graduation, for calling me a disappointment, for making me doubt myself. But I'm also telling you that you no longer have power over me. My value isn't determined by your approval. She hung up before they could respond, and felt lighter than she had in years. 1 year later, Ava stood in Rosario's restaurant, wearing an elegant dress, surrounded by the people who'd become her real family. Sophia, who'd given her a chance when she needed it most. The regulars who'd watched her grow from broken to whole. Marco, now 7 and thriving, who held the rings with serious importance. And Dante, standing at the altar Sophia had set up in the restaurant's private room, looking at Ava like she'd hung the moon. I was lost, Dante said during his vows, his voice thick with emotion, drowning in grief and violence, pushing away the only person who mattered. And then you walked into my life and refused to let me stay lost. You fought for my son when I'd forgotten how. You fought for us when no one else would have dared. You taught me that strength isn't about power. It's about choosing love even when it's terrifying. When it was Ava's turn, she looked at Marco and Dante, her chosen family, and said, I spent years believing I was worthless because the people who were supposed to love me couldn't see my value. But you both taught me that worth isn't given by others. It's claimed by ourselves. You taught me that being brave means standing up even when you're terrified, loving even when you've been hurt, believing even when everyone says you're a fool. She smiled through tears. I was called a failure for becoming a teacher. But standing here, having helped raise this extraordinary little boy, having built a program that's touching hundreds of children's lives, being loved by a man who sees all of me and chooses me anyway, I realized I didn't fail. I became exactly who I was meant to be. The restaurant erupted in applause as they kissed, and Ava felt the final piece of her broken heart click into place. 3 years after that first Tuesday, when a broken waitress told off a Mafia boss for a crying child, Ava stood in her Columbia office, reviewing applications for her expanded outreach program. On her desk sat a framed photo. Her, Dante, Marco, and their 6-month-old daughter, Elena, named after the woman whose death had almost broken them all, but whose memory had led them to each other. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Sophia entered, carrying a familiar basket. I brought you lunch, Cara, and I wanted to tell you something. What's that? Ava asked, smiling at the woman who became a surrogate mother. Remember the day you asked for a job? You said you needed to prove to yourself you were worth something. Sophia's eyes glistened. You were always worth everything, Ava. You just needed to believe it. And look at you now, changing the world one child at a time, loving fiercely, living fully. That's not just success. That's triumph. After Sophia left, Ava sat quietly, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. From the devastation of her parents' rejection to the terror of standing up to armed men. From the darkness of believing she was worthless to the light of knowing she was priceless. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dante. Marco insists on making dinner tonight. God help us all. Come home soon. We love you. Ava smiled, gathering her things. Home. Not the place where she'd been born, but the family she'd chosen and who'd chosen her back. As she locked her office door, Dr. Ava Chen Moretti, the nameplate read, she thought about the woman she'd been that graduation day, sobbing alone while her parents dismissed her dreams. If she could go back and tell that broken girl one thing, it would be this: you are not what they say you are. You are what you choose to become. And your choices will lead you to a love so powerful, a purpose so clear, and a strength so profound that one day you'll look back at this moment and realize it wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of everything. The waitress who'd been called worthless had become a doctor, a mother, a wife, a warrior for children who needed someone in their corner. She'd proven that empowerment isn't given, it's claimed. That worth isn't determined by others' opinions. It's defined by our own choices. That the most powerful transformation happens when we stop asking for permission to be valuable and start believing we always were. And every day, Ava taught that lesson to the children in her program. To Marco, to little Elena, who would grow up knowing her mother was a woman who'd turned pain into purpose and rejection into resilience. Because that's what survivors do. That's what warriors do. That's what women do when they finally understand their power. They rise. They fight. They love. They win. And they never, ever let anyone tell them they're not enough again.